Welcome back. You're listening to the panel discussion, Cybersecurity, Ensuring Successful Security Outcomes, sponsored by Optiv and Checkpoint on Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guests today are Jonathan Fibus, the Chief Information Security Officer at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, Stephen Hernandez, the Chief Information Security Officer and Director of Information Assurance Services at the Education Department, Linus Baker, the Director of Cybersecurity at the Defense Logistics Agency, Kenneth McNeil, the Chief Information Officer at the National Guard Bureau, and Jeff Schwartz, the Vice President of North American Engineering at Checkpoint. Now, gentlemen, for a break, we got to understand the move toward outcome cybersecurity, not worried so much about compliance. Let me take the next step there, because one of the things to get, I think, agencies and really any organization toward this idea of outcomes is ensuring that there's not silos, so that your security operations center is talking to your network operations center, that there's an enterprise view. Jeff, let me start with you. What is the key here? What should agencies, what should all organizations consider when they're kind of breaking down those silos?
Yeah, I think one of the largest factors is that when we look at the capabilities of the adversary, or the malicious actors in this case, that they're evolving much more quickly and much more dynamically than the IT infrastructure, the operational capacity of many organizations' ability to identify and react in real time to these evolving capacities and capabilities on the malicious actor side. So I think this is where, one, it presents an operational gap for many organizations to, one, see what's happening in a thorough way, but two, when it comes to response, to be able to provide the portability of controls, that if they identify something in one environment, to enforce controls in related areas but independent infrastructure. So differences between, let's say, data center infrastructure and cloud infrastructure, where there may be, let's say, strong, mature controls for email, but if those same files are downloaded via web download in a SaaS offering or some cloud offering, that same attachment, that same file over email is blocked, but in some type of mobile consumption factor, it becomes a challenge. So I think, so there's 2 points there. One, the operational capacity of organizations to flex or adapt quickly to the changing threat landscape that is presented by the malicious actors. And two, the portability of controls across different infrastructure and asset classes that traditionally were, as you described, siloed more discreetly.
I think Jeff brings up a really interesting point, this idea that as malicious actors, as threats continue to evolve, if you're only looking at it from one perspective, you may be missing the other piece. Linus, walk me through this, because DLA is part of the Defense Department. I'm sure you are seeing a huge uptick in attacks and attempts to attack. How do you ensure that you get this enterprise view?
Yeah, and in terms of attacks, yeah, that's a constant. In terms of malicious actors, for very good reasons. As I said before, we manage 9 separate supply chains for the department, so that's pretty commonplace. One of the things we've done over the last few years, and it sounds a bit counterintuitive, through some organizational changes, our NOSC and NEMO were basically separated. We initially designed it where they were co-joined, essentially under the same command and control. When we unified cybersecurity across the agency under myself into one organization that was a direct report to the CIO, and it had a dotted line report to the director's command staff group, we had to make that separation. Now, they still have a symbiotic relationship where they still work together. So we intentionally did not create a silo where they were walled off. So they're essentially in the same operations center under a separate chain of command. However, that aspect isn't as much of an impediment as it is to understanding the mission and understanding what's critical. So one of the things we did as an additional step was we embedded a counter cyber intelligence asset within our CERT. Now, what that does is it allows us to add some attribution to some of the anomalous activity we may encounter. And it also allows us to better execute, intelligence preparation of cyberspace. So it is critical that those silos don't form And as I talked about before, the integration of cybersecurity / cyber resilience with logistics operations is critical as well. So that the aperture is open and you clearly understand where the mission could be impacted, and you're able to apply some attribution to some of those anomalous things you detect.
Jonathan, jump in here as well, because I want to bring in the civilian side. What have you guys done with your NOC, your SOC? How have you been able to take your enterprise view?
So over time, we've started integrating them. A few years ago, we had them sitting in very different locations, actually in different buildings. Now they're sitting in the same room, which allows them to talk to each other when they're seeing things. But as we've moved and improved our tools, we've moved away from, well, the same thing as moving away from signature-based protections to algorithms and heuristics. They now have a view of data. They're looking at the same data sources. They're looking at them in slightly different ways. But when something odd happens, heads pop up, they start looking across at each other and start working together on the issue. Sometimes it's something in operations, network operations, that turns out to be a security issue. Something it's the SOC guys who notice there's a challenge, and they start pointing to the network operations guys who clear things up. But again, having data sources, having views of the dashboard, and having some intelligence behind that data to help us key on what's unusual and what needs more focus, along with having a very skilled staff who knows how to interpret the data that they're seeing on the dashboard, gets us moving through all these feeds together and getting us better outcomes, which I think is the whole goal of having a cybersecurity and operations program. And as we've moved to maximum telework, mandatory telework, and the number of endpoints that we have has increased exponentially, it's been great having these folks, having that relationship, being able to know how to find each other even when they're together and apart. So building on those successes has been a fantastic opportunity for us.
Stephen, I'm going to ask you to put on a different hat. Now, we know you're the CISO at education, but you also have a hat, a quote unquote part-time job with the Federal CISO Council. And one of the things that I know has come up several times through OMB, through the CIO Council, through the CISO Council, is security operations centers, and to consolidate and bring them together. Can you just put on that hat for a second and walk us through some of the conversations that the CISO Council is having about SOCs to ensure agencies do have that enterprise view?
Sure. So, you know, we look at the president's management agenda, and there's three pillars there. There's modernization, workforce, and data. And when we look at especially that workforce and modernization piece, and in some cases the data, one of the natural outcomes was how are we optimizing and modernizing, and in some places consolidating our security operations centers across the board. And by far and large, the conversation hasn't necessarily been collapsing data centers. Certainly there are some agencies that are in that situation where they have that opportunity, but more so the discussion has been around optimization. And we've heard several of those pieces from the other panelists, whether it's tighter integration with network operations, whether it's the leveraging and the maturing of threat operations, which is very important, whether it's insider threat or outsider threat, your security operations team needs to be on top of that, and they need to have those tiebacks into the encounter intelligence space. But the third one, which I think is very important, and it's something that we at the Department of Education are working with on a day-to-day basis, is this idea that the SOC has now become a master collaborator, and it must be a master collaborator. In our instance, we don't own any federal data centers. We're 100% reliant on our cloud service providers and our colo providers to be our partner in security operations and monitoring. What that means is that we have to establish connections and relationships between our security operations and the vendor security operations. And in our case, that's upwards of 36 plus major players and 100 minor players. And I love this quote. It's from Leigh Thompson. She's a professor out at Kellogg School of Management in Northwestern. She talks about this idea that collaboration is like a good party. and that people show up at the right time, wearing the right thing, bringing the right things, because the host has established the norms. And I think that with our SOC, and as we look across the federal enterprise, there is that opportunity for the security operations centers to elevate themselves and make sure that they are establishing those norms, whether it's data, whether it's communication flow, whether it's establishing timelines and SLAs for all the partner security operations features, so that when something happens, everyone is on the same page, the same tempo, and we're all acting in unison to respond to it.
That's a great example. I love that. Security operations centers can be like, parties. Everyone knows the protocols, how to show up and do that work. Kenneth McNeil from the National Guard Bureau, talk a little bit about your work around Security Operations Center, Network Operations Center, and really just the enterprise view of cyber.
Yes. So what we've done is we've flattened out architecture by consolidating network and security operations. Again, the Guard is made up of Army National Guard or Air National Guard, and we also leverage the joint service provider for our headquarters element that's in the Pentagon. So for us, it was all about let's not have our own networks internal when the big services already have networks. So either you're an airman or you're a soldier and you're leveraging those networks. So what we've done is flatten the operation. We've taken the direction of, because you're more vulnerable, with additional endpoints and capabilities out there that you really can leverage organizations that have a tighter structure. So we've taken that approach. We've also been in support, my office, of the DoD way ahead, integrating DevSecOps with both new and existing investments from the National Guard and from across DoD. So that has been a benefit for us. We've started that process almost 2 years ago, and that is working as we look at especially integrating down at the 54 states and territories in the District of Columbia that, like I said earlier, that are also on that network. So it's helped us here at the headquarters, but more importantly, it's been a tremendous asset and how we're consolidated supporting the states. And on the air side of it, the Air National Guard has traditionally and still does ride on the Air National Guard network. And so we never really had a Air National Guard piece of the network. So we just continue to leverage how they were doing business in the past. But on the Army side, of course, we're tied in more with the Army being a part of the DoD. And so through consolidating, it is working. And we've also went through data center consolidation in our organization, which there were small data centers, but that's been a tremendous help and making sure that we tighten our cybersecurity posture.
You bring up DevSecOps, and it's a good segue. We're just coming up to a break, but I just want to bring this up. Does this mean automation, orchestration are starting to play a bigger role for the National Guard as you look at your cybersecurity, as you're trying to deal with this flood of data that I think all of us are facing?
Oh, absolutely. We have a really tight relationship with the DoD Joint Artificial Intelligence Center. And so we're working closely with them to leverage capability that they're developing for the DoD, and we really are have some promise in some of the capabilities that they're working on now as far as big data. Obviously, during this COVID-19 situation that we're in now, with the states having to look at data to make critical decisions at the state level in the National Guard and in supporting the governors. There are capabilities that we're working closely with the JAIC to develop. we see that as obviously the future. And this has to be timely information for, of course, rapid decisions and quick decisions that the senior leaders in our nation need to make.
All right, we're coming right up to a break, so let's jump in and take that break. When we come back, we can either continue our conversation about automation, orchestration, or there's plenty of other topics to hit upon. You're listening to the panel discussion, Cybersecurity, Ensuring Successful Security Outcomes, sponsored by Optiv and Checkpoint on Federal News Network.